Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Ken Biberaj, and welcome to Coffee with Ken. We are very excited today. It is week 65 of social distancing, but more importantly, it's also been 5 weeks since the CDC relaxed the mask mandate for vaccinated Americans. In the news today, the Biden administration has formed a blueprint to combat domestic terrorism. Stephen Colbert returned to the Ed Sullivan Theater in person for a capacity crowd for the Late Show. And today's topic is about leadership. And we're joined by my good friend, Daron K. Roberts, the founding director of the Center for Sports Leadership Innovation, University of Texas, Austin. Daron, great to see you, man.
Ken, great to be with you. Great to be on the show. I'm excited for the conversation, brother.
Listen, I mean, it's an amazing trajectory you've had, right? You went to Kennedy School with me, then you went to Harvard Law, you went back to Texas, you worked in a big law firm, and now you're the governor of Texas. I mean, that plan you laid out has just gone perfect, right? I mean, right on track. Exactly.
Life's full of. Hey, man. First, I just remember our days at the Kennedy School fondly. Those were some good days. And when I was walking around Cambridge between '02 and '04, that was the plan. It was grad school, law school, work for a big firm in Houston, go back to my hometown of Mount Pleasant, hang a shingle, run for state senator, and then become governor by 40. Now, I turned 42 last year. So obviously I took a wrong turn somewhere. Or really, to be honest with you, my wife said I took the right turn because I think I'm fairly certain I won't be in politics anytime soon. I enjoy my life too much. But, that was the plan. And, I just tell people that some of the best moments in your life come through those cul-de-sacs and the detours that are gut-wrenching when you're going through them. But I remember getting waitlisted in law school, and my mentor says, I've got a job for you working for Joe Lieberman. Why don't you take it? And I don't want to be in DC. It's May 2001, but I can't describe for you how much of an education I received by being there during September 11th. So embrace the detours. They don't feel good in real time, but they really provide you with some long-term perspective.
No, I want to dive into all of that. But real quick, look, I mean, this has been a year of uncertainty and change. I mean, just give us some quick insight. What's it been like for you? I mean, you go a million miles an hour, you're speaking, you're traveling, and then the pandemic hits. Like, what's it been like for you, for your business, your work, family? I mean, what's the last year been like?
For my work, I have three primary verticals. So I am a lecturer at UT, and I'm a director of a Center for Sports Leadership Institute. And then the second vertical is I speak and I coach. So prior to the pandemic, I was doing roughly 50 to 60 speeches, of which 45 were outside of Texas. I live in Austin, so I had to be on a plane 45 times a year. Then the third vertical is venture capital, real estate investing. And so this is a space that started to get interest in about 5 years ago, and then joined on as a partner with a firm, Notley Ventures, here in town. So I'll tell you how all three were impacted. One, on the education side, we had to switch to Zoom, obviously. And we had to convert a lot of our in-person leadership trainings that we did for coaches and athletes into, digital platforms.
Yeah.
It's allowed us to scale exponentially.
Amazing.
So something that, I think that a lot of people, some of this, whether it's the hybrid workplace or embracing web conferencing, the pandemic forced that, and then we've seen some efficiencies that are going to stick around post the pandemic. Speeches, before March of 2020, I would turn down any virtual talk. I said, hey, Ken, I need to be in the room. I got to feel the energy. I remember one day I did 3 speeches. I did a morning talk. I came downstairs, made some oatmeal for the kids. I did a lunch talk, finished, made some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And then I did a 3 p.m. talk. There was no baggage check, no Ubers, no Marriott check-ins. And so I really learned that there's a lot of efficiency that I'm really starting to build into my practice.
And the number of people that could tune in for each of those segments is like infinite. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I've seen this from event planners. They're saying, look, we're getting 2x the amount of participation through a virtual platform. All of our events in the future will at the very minimum be hybrid. If it's in person, we're going to have a virtual component so that we can bring in a constituency that beforehand would not have taken advantage of the opportunity.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, look, I mean, you have this amazing book, Call an Audible, teaching people about how to make a pivot, how to embrace it. COVID was a big audible for folks. So tell us a little bit about you spending all of these years trying to get into Harvard Law School. I mean, what's amazing about your story is like, it's not like you got in and then said, actually, I want to be, I want to coach in the NFL. You had to persistently, physically go to the admissions office, sit there, persuade them, convince them. And then after 3 years, you get in and then you're on this track and you're like, actually. So tell us about that, like your mindset, what made you make that pivot? Like, why was that the right decision after all of the kind of grit and hard work that you actually talk a lot about in the book in your own life experience, and then to make a hard turn on it?
Yeah, I love Daniel Kahneman, and I think in one of the economic concepts that humans know in theory, but are very loath to practice is one of sunk cost, right?
Huh.
And so one of the things that I kept hearing, I really didn't have any dreams of becoming a football coach. It was this football camp that I just happened to work the summer before my last year of law school that prompted me to say, wow, this is what I have to do. Most of my classmates thought I was batshit crazy. They said, look, what in the hell are you doing? Why are you throwing away this degree? And this is a point that I really want to share, and I think is important, is that oftentimes, one of my theories is that the reason why you go to these schools is so you can have options. It's for optionality.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes we give ourselves incredible opportunities, whether it's educational or from a travel perspective, but then we use those to sort of put our plans into a straitjacket.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember speaking with my dean at the time was Elena Kagan. And I'm talking with her about this thing. And she said, look, which one is more rare? You going to be an associate for a law firm or getting one of 32 teams to let you inside the building? And that's a philosophy and a mindset that I've taken with me. She said, look, if you want to ever practice law, I'm fairly certain that, people will still be having legal issues. So don't think that there's a narrow window. So that's one thing I just want people to kind of think through, is that oftentimes sort of pigeonhole ourselves. Some of the windows that we assume are very narrow are actually wider than we think. And the last thing I will say is, don't forget your gut is a source of data too. I think oftentimes we get stuck in the algorithms and the analytics and the plans and the 5 and the 10-year sort of forward-looking plans. Your gut tells you some things that your mind can't quite comprehend. So be willing to listen to it.
That's good advice. She probably has a future somewhere. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I think she knows what she's talking about.
So you're at Harvard Law. You decide you want to get into the NFL. Like, how did you get in there? Like, I just love the stories, the anecdotes, and it's nasty of it. But share with folks, like, how did you even get in there? I mean, and how Harvard?
My basic approach to life is that, dreams start in Microsoft Word, strategy begins in Microsoft Excel. So for me, everything comes down to a spreadsheet in terms of strategy. So I said, look, there are 32 teams. I'm going to go online. This is 2006. I go online, put all 32 teams into a column. I find all of their mailing addresses, put that into a column. Then I go to the bio page for the entire coaching staff. And I went through every bio to see if I had any sort of connection to someone. Did they grow up in Texas? Did they go to the University of Texas? Did they study government in undergrad? Like, I was looking for the remotest, like the most remote that I could. And then I just went on a letter writing campaign. I wrote a letter to every head coach, every defensive coordinator, every offensive coordinator. And then if there was a linkage between one of the coaches on the staff, I would write a letter to him as well. And look, I have a lot of young people who come to me and say, I want to coach, or I want to be a GM in some professional sport. I said, okay, it starts with a letter writing campaign, and then you sort of go from there. So that was my approach. I made phone calls. This is old school. I sent faxes. I sent emails. And I think that for industries where there is a high barrier to entry, one approach won't cut it. So I hear people say, oh, I sent emails and I didn't hear anything back. Well, did you send LinkedIn DMs? Did you send snail mail, right? Did you call the office? Like, it has to be an all front war. And that's what I started in the summer of 06. And fortunately, the Chiefs gave me a shot.
And you get there and they didn't make you, special teams coach, right? You were just barely in there. And talk about that, right? You come from Cambridge, having been at Harvard Kennedy School, Harvard Law School with this pedigree. But you go in there and you do like everything nobody else wants to do, right? And why that approach, right? Like there was no arrogance about it, right? Like you almost embraced the harder stuff that nobody wanted to do. Why? What is that approach and strategy about?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this is a lesson that I think was reinforced through the pandemic as well,
Yeah.
two leadership traits that I think are very understated: humility and agility.
Mm.
Right? Humility and agility, and understanding where you have leverage. So none of the football coaches inside of Arrowhead Stadium gave a damn that I had been to Harvard Law School. All right. All they knew was there's this guy who didn't play in college, who wasn't the son of Mike Tomlin, and somehow just showed up on the front door. So my approach was, I always first try to put my empathetic hat on and think, what is the other person thinking? So they're probably thinking, hey, I'm kind of doing this as like a challenge to myself, and then I'm going to go and practice law after a year. And so I said, okay, I have to go all in. So whether it's cleaning whiteboards or stocking the shelves of the kitchen or picking up guys from the airport or dropping guys off at the airport, I just made myself available 24/7, never turned my phone off, and I set up shop. I lived in Arrowhead for those first 7 months. And I think this is important because oftentimes people with these sorts of pedigrees or sort of these, you fall in love with your own LinkedIn profile. And for people who are trying to break into a new industry, you have to understand that the respect and the cachet that was associated with where you've been may not transfer over into the new place. So just drop it, right? And put your learning hat on and go in ready to do the work.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, how much of this, so look, I went to New York Law School. We have some New York Law School students tuning in. I kind of saw this almost connectivity with even like the grit and like the legal experience, and issue spotting and due diligence and analysis and kind of target, right? Like how much of your law background, right? Like it is a sunk cost, but I feel like you still leaned on and relied on it and maximized and utilized it for different stuff, right? Even if it was analyzing the grocery shopping list for the team, right? And finding inefficiencies and issue spotting, right? How much of like your law background do you think helped at the Chiefs and beyond, and even in your coaching today?
Yeah, kid, if I had to do it over again, I would do it the exact same way. I've oftentimes told people that, I don't think there is a better education from a problem solving perspective than the 3-year law program. And as you mentioned, I mean, when I look at football strategy, it is the same as writing a brief or it's the same as, okay, who's their best player? Okay, what's their best argument? Okay, what's our best position? What's their counter argument to our best player and our best play? And so that strategy of walking, scenario walking, issue spotting, that is a trait that I think has transferability across a lot of sectors. And so in terms of the sunk cost, really what I was talking about is more of the time. People would say, oh, you've done 3 hard years. You know how law school is. They kill you for a year, they lighten up second year, and then they pretty much lose you in the third, right? So it's like, you've done 3 years of manual labor. Why would you waste that? But you really can't put a price tag on the value of that sort of mode of thinking. And it's paid off. The ROI, I can't even really put a number on it in terms of how valuable it's been for me.
That's amazing. So I read an article yesterday where they're predicting that this summer might be the summer of major and massive resignations, where the workforce is kind of coming back in person. People have had a year to kind of work remote, adjust, and figure out who they are, what they want to do. But now people may be looking to kind of transition. Well, what's your advice to folks after this year, in terms of like, how did you advise people to kind of maintain and grow during COVID? But then how are you, kind of talking to folks about coming out of this and like finding where they should be and making a pivot and maybe, just taking a whole new course, right? Like, I think this is such a unique time. And it seems like the metrics are kind of backing it up where people are genuinely kind of pausing and reflecting and deciding like, do I move? How do I get the work-life balance? Do I need to be doing something else? How do I use technology? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, Ken, listen, I just read an article, the Wall Street Journal, the Great Resignation article. So I'll say a few things. One, I predict that for the next 5 years, HR directors and headhunters will be some of the busiest people on the planet. The second thing I'm going to say is that, the pandemic did a few things. One, there were some people who were pushing for a hybrid work environment. And the C-suite said that probably won't work. The problem is that now people have a data set and they can say, hey, listen, I have 15 months of data that shows I either met or exceeded my performance pre-pandemic. So that is taking the excuse off of the table. I'll say this to people. If you're an employee in America, on the globe, there is no other point at which you will have more leverage than within the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's this moment in time.
This is the moment in time. So if you want to craft how your work life looks, very intentional and creative about doing that right now, because this window will close. And I think it's a 6 to 12 month sort of span. The next thing I will say is this, parents spent more time with their kids than they had spent in the 5 years prior to the pandemic. And so really think about, one, what parts of that relationship, for those of the folks who have children, what parts of that relationship do you want to keep intact? Also, too, I think oftentimes if you're a parent, think about what the impact's going to be when you revert back to the norm, the commute, the 5-day back and forth late nights. Think about the impact also the other folks in your home. I say be very creative right now. If it's a 3-2, if it's a 2-3, if it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like however you want that to look, this is the time to craft the plan. I think you have to take data in from the time that you've been away and really make the case to your employers. And also the one thing I will say is this, as you know, it is a hiring frenzy right now for good people. So if your current employer isn't willing to meet what you want, I think that you've got to take the leap, right? Because you have options. If you're a high performer right now in 2021, I don't really care what industry it is, you have options. So be intentional and really take advantage of this next 6 to 12 months, man.
So I think all of this kind of ties into another topic that you talk often about in terms of empathy, right? The last year has shown you can trust your people and they can be productive, but they're going to be looking for flexibility, right? So if you kind of take all that and ignore it, then shame on the employer. And if you as the employee don't stand tough to say what I'm looking for, what I need because of my family and my obligations and this and that, and maybe I'm better at 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., but then I want to get home early for whatever, this is a kind of moment in time. How do you think about empathy, and how do you advise companies to incorporate it in their policies and their recruitment and retention and motivation and what they do for their workforce?
I have a colleague at the University of Texas who does research around trauma, and we've been having some conversations, and she's telling me that as she's doing some interviews with employees, this social distancing pandemic life that we went through, there's a significant amount of folks who are just unsure of how to operate in the office environment.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say this is because if you're on the employer side of the ledger, I think it is to your benefit to put your empathy hat on and say, listen, let me take the perspective of the person whom we're asking to come back into the office on September 1. And let me really think through his or her thoughts, fears around coming back into the office and use that as a starting point. The companies that I've seen do it the wrong way is, okay, September 1, it's 5 days a week. We're going back to the norm. Either you get on board or you don't. And they're seeing a mass exodus even before they get to September 1, right? So I think from an employer's perspective, one, put your empathetic hat on and think through the range of emotions that employees may be feeling. Two, any sort of plan that you have in place or going to put in place, there needs to be a very phased transition. So this does not need to be like a circle the date on the calendar. Let's all come in and have a fiesta and celebrate that we're back to normal. There needs to be a phased transition in order to allow people to reacclimate. The last thing I'm going to say again is, look, good people will, if you're an employer, I want you to listen to this, no matter what your justification is for why people should come back, if you're unwilling to loosen some of the restrictions and mindsets that you had pre-pandemic, you're going to lose some of your best talent. That is a fact.
Now, it's fascinating because at our firm, what we do is we advise companies on their real estate, right? We only represent tenants. So it's been a fascinating kind of cadence over the last year about like, okay, what do we do? How do we engage our employees? How do they work remote? What do we do with our lease, shrink, grow, et cetera? And so much of it is HR at the table, right? You're talking about them being busy. They need to be at the seat of the table when it comes to real estate. What does the physical space look like, expectations, how you're going to set it up? And it's one of these things where we're seeing a lot of companies kind of embrace this, and you need to, right? I mean, a lot of people look at the dollars associated with how much you spend on real estate, and they're like, this is too expensive, we need people in there. You know what's more expensive than the real estate? Your people. And if you're spending money hiring, recruiting, retaining all the time, and people are leaving, that's going to be more expensive at the end of the day. So you got to kind of have this all together in a kind of a coordinated way. I mean, it's
absolutely. I mean, as you know, right, your fixed costs associated with brick and mortar pales in comparison to what a churn rate can do for your balance sheet, right? In order to fill a position, this is one of the highest cost measures that a company will undertake. And so I think that going back to humility, I think oftentimes there are some C-suite execs who can't really grapple with the fact that they've lost some leverage in this relationship. And I think it needs to be, right? And we need to rethink this, not as a power struggle, but listen, how can we create a win-win situation for both you and for both of us, both you and the company? How can we create a win-win situation and move it less from a, either or 0-1 outcome?
So you're right. This is a unique kind of moment in time, the next 6 months, right? Where we're kind of, folks have kind of made it through the challenges of the pandemic, health, and so on. And now we're kind of thinking about their own futures. If people are pausing to reflect, how do you advise folks to think about their next step, right? I mean, you mentioned the Word doc and the Excel. How do they carve out in their day time? Because time flies. And this is like, I feel like it flies even faster now because there is no separation between work and home. And you're just kind of turning nonstop, right? We had this coffee talk over the summer last year with Beth Comstock, the former vice chair of GE, and she's a big, priority and focus on innovation. And like 20% of your time needs to be just, not what you're doing every day and all the fires you're putting out, but like thinking strategically about how you're innovating and planning for the future. I mean, how do you talk to people in your coaching and your practice to get them, to kind of step back and reflect about where they're going to be, and especially in this moment in time that's so unique, I think.
Yeah, I think the first step is this level of self-awareness, right? So I talk about it begins with introspection. So I have 3 I's. So introspection, honestly take an assessment of how happy, just from an employment perspective, how happy were you with your job pre-pandemic? How happy are you now, right? So be very honest, because I think oftentimes, the W-2s and the direct deposit and the 401ks can sort of cloud our vision. And we are surviving a job rather than thriving in one. Okay. The second thing I say is, look, iteration is the next point. So once I get this sort of baseline level of self-awareness, being honest with myself in terms of what type of fulfillment am I gaining from this enterprise, the next step is iteration. And the one thing that I think is really just fascinating about this world that we're living in 2021, it's never been easier in the history of mankind to monetize your skill set, right? My parents both worked at jobs for 30 years and they had great pensions, and, you retired and they had a party for you and they gave you a clock, and that was sort of the thing. I'm looking at the ways, for example, I worked with a client who was an investment banker, but he also was really into vertical farming, okay? For vertical gardening, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of a side thing. And he had like an alias Instagram site that he would post all these vertical gardening things. Pandemic hits and he gets a flood of DMs from people saying, I will pay you to shoot a video on how to get started. Okay.
Fascinating.
He's like, this is interesting. 6 months later, he's looking at an online course that he's built. He's bundled up these vertical gardening because every one of these urban settings were looking for outlets, right?
100%.
He's transitioning January 1 to do that full time. He's built a business around it. And I think that it's very interesting because oftentimes we get so attached to what our business card says. And there's oftentimes this little thing that you do on the side that, you're in a flow state while you're doing it. It brings you joy, but we still have this sort of 1960s mentality that if it's not associated with a Fortune 500 company, or if it doesn't impress people during holiday parties, like we shouldn't put our time and energy into it. this is the time to be bold. And I think, this next generation will be that sort of multi-sector, multifaceted, not an employee, but really a hired gun in which he or she will work in various sectors across various domains and may also be monetizing their skill set through a side hustle. So think about how you want to iterate. The last thing I'd say is that influence, right? Just think about, I always talk about David Brooks, and he talks about the eulogy versus the resume traits. And we spend most of our time on the planet really trying to beef up and buoy the resume traits. At the end of the day, it's the eulogy traits, like what you're remembered for, how you help people. That's what lasts. So spend as much time, if not more, thinking about the eulogy traits as you do your resume traits.
So before I let you go, last kind of question. So you're on these 3 verticals, with UT and this amazing program that's 7 years in now, which is kind of crazy to think about when you started it. Your coaching and your advice and kind of, mission-driven priorities. And then the VC, which we didn't really talk much about, but over the next decade, do you see yourself equally spending time amongst the 3? Do you see one kind of developing and garnering more of your attention and focus? I mean, where do you see your kind of, focus and energy? I mean, these are 3 really cool kind of buckets.
Yeah, here's a great question, and one that I think about often. The things that light me up, I love teaching. So any version of Daron in the future will have some facet of teaching attached to it. So I think for me, I will always keep my teaching position at the university. The next thing that lights me up is writing. I love to write. I'd love to jump into fiction. This is one of those excruciating practices that at the end of it, I'm so tired, but I just light up when I'm writing. So I love to write. I love speaking. So I'll continue to do keynote speaking. And then that last vertical for me will be the venture capital piece in real estate. My wife and I have done multifamily investing, since we were married. And then we're starting to step up and do some land development. And then I just love venture capital because it keeps me young. So getting pitches from startup entrepreneurs and kind of hearing what's around the bend, that keeps me young. So that's the desired division of labor for me. And I'm working to, look, it's a process, as you know, Ken. And so I'm working to build that life.
Interesting. Well, look, it's always so great to just catch up in general, and appreciate you taking the time to come on and share some of your amazing wisdom and your story and your background. It's always great seeing you, man.
No, Ken, listen, man, I'll tell folks that people who didn't know you from the old country, one of the kindest, smartest, I always remember your humility when we were at the Kennedy School, and you had done so many things and accomplished so much. But if you had a conversation with you at a bar, as we used to frequent sometimes, or just coffee, you got a very humble and meaningful man. So I love to see what you've done, and thanks for having me on.
No, listen, I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. In the meantime, obviously, continue to wear a mask if you're not vaccinated. And if you're not vaccinated, get vaccinated. And next week on Coffee with Ken, a former IOP connection, Dan Glickman, the former Secretary of Agriculture, is going to be on talking about his new book, Laughing at Me, navigating his time in Washington, and just what we need, I think. So, Daron, thanks so much. Appreciate everyone tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon.
Ken, thank you.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.